Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, After the Flood, how Oneida, New York streamlined their operations. My name is Damian Wade, and I'm the Marketing and Events Coordinator here at Cartograph. And here with me is John Rauscher, City Engineer with the City of Oneida, and Todd Henderson, Cartograph Solutions Consultant. And I'm now going to turn things over to Todd.
Thank you, Damien. It's good to be with all of you today, and we're very excited about our webinar today. I think you're going to get some great information about operations and how to do things within your organization, some really good helpful tools that you're going to take away from here. So as we do so, I want to thank you for taking the poll that we put up here, and as you can see, we have 81% use OMS and 19% are not currently using Cartograph products. So that's good in the sense that I think you'll get some good ideas about how Cartograph works and some of the benefits that John has seen. Also, your organization, a disaster plan. We're going to be talking about that a lot today, especially toward the end. So really interesting results here too. 38% yes, you do. It's been updated within the last 10 years. 19% no, and 44% I don't know. I think that's pretty common throughout the spectrum of the country, and seeing those results, I think you're going to get a lot of good benefit from our webinar today. So thank you so much for taking those polls and for responding to them. It's a feature that we've added into our webinars that I think is going to be very beneficial going forward as you tune into Cartograph's webinars. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to John once I kind of ask him a question here, and that's really how we're going to do today. It's going to be kind of interview style, and we're very delighted to have John Rauscher with us from the city of Oneida, New York. And John, first of all, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to spend some time with us today and talk about this event that you really learned some great lessons from. It was an unfortunate event, but we do know that this is oftentimes what happens within our organizations. We have fires or floods or mudslides or tornadoes or some type of natural disaster that we're just going to have to confront. Maybe it's a water line break or something like that, something that affects our community in a big way. And you guys obviously had a pretty significant event happen. We're going to be talking about that. But before we do, I just want to get some kind of information for people who are listening. Just tell us, if you would, John, where Oneida, New York is located, and kind of a little bit of kind of the demographic information, the size of the community, and how big of an operation it is as far as your personnel and things like that. So with that, again, thanks a lot, John, for joining us, and take it away. Let's hear about Oneida, New York, and what you guys do, where you're located in New York.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. But yeah, let me kind of show you where we are in the world. So we are located in pretty much dead center of New York State in Madison County. City of Oneida it's a pretty small city. We've got a population of about 11,000 people, and we're actually the only city in Madison County. So our DPW staff, we've got about 13 DPW staff. So again, we're a pretty small DPW facility, and kind of gives you a gist of where we are. And I guess I can get into what happened during our flood event, which we had on June 28th, 2013. So we, this kind of outlines our city, and as you can see, we have a creek, Oneida Creek, that runs along the eastern border of our city limits. And on the right-hand side, you'll see sort of the floodplain area that incorporates some of the residential commercial area in the city. So it's about 100 acres. There's about 250 residential commercial structures in that floodplain. So on June 28th, we experienced this flood event that basically wiped out that entire area. So what you see on the map here for our floodplain limits is pretty accurate to what we saw on June 28th. So if you guys have floodplain mapping, we found it was pretty accurate to what we saw during our June 28th flood event. So what you're seeing here is sort of right at the aftermath. This is an aerial shot from our governor taking a flyover in a helicopter. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see this is some of our emergency operations that occurred on the first day. So, you know, you see the airboat taking grandma out of the house, and this is some of our DPW crew and a high-wheel truck with some makeshift sort of ladders to get folks out of the floodplain area. So, pretty intense day for us in the city of Oneida.
Yeah, one of the things I found fascinating, of course, you know, anytime you see an airboat in your community, that's probably not a good thing. So
right, yeah.
when you see that picture, it's like, oh man, this shows really the scope and the scale of it. And I know one thing you mentioned, John, is really the accuracy of your FEMA map. I thought that was really important. So a good tip for people is when you see that FEMA flood map, John unfortunately experienced firsthand that it is indeed accurate. So that's something definitely to pay attention to. But one of the things that I, you know, kind of wanted to get to is really the kind of the sequence of events. I know that you guys had a pretty significant rain. You had some rain, you know, weeks prior, but you had a pretty significant event. I think it was the night before, several inches of rain came, but it was the next morning. The creek was starting to rise, and all of a sudden, you know, about 8 a.m., I remember in talking about this and reading the story with you, John, that's when things started to happen. So if you wouldn't mind, kind of walk us through that process of, okay, here's kind of the sequence of events, maybe a little bit of a timeline with that, and how you reacted and what kind of transpired in that.
Sure. Yeah, so one thing of interest, you look at these photos, especially on the right, it's not raining. So this all occurred on, you know, kind of a cloudy day with maybe some light rain throughout the day, but you know, we didn't get an intense sort of rainfall the day of our event. But what we did have was probably a month worth of rain beforehand. So everything was super saturated. All the soils were super saturated. And then, you know, one sort of rainfall kind of tipped it over the edge for us and overbanked the creek. So, yeah, just to kind of walk through what sort of occurred on that day, it was, of course, a Friday because everything happens on a Friday. And it was about 8 o'clock when our shift starts, our crews start coming in, well, our management crews start coming in. And our fire department noticed that, hey, the creek is, it's rising. It's, you know, we're seeing it rise pretty quickly. And, you know, just to be cautious, we started relocating our DPW fleet because of course, our DPW facility is in this floodplain along with our water department. So we started relocating our vehicles onto higher ground, and it wasn't long after that we were driving back into this floodwater to start rescuing folks, supporting police department, fire department operations. So it happened really quickly. I would say by mid-morning we're looking at, you know, some flooding, and then by afternoon this is kind of what we're looking at here. So that's one thing that kind of surprised us, was just how quick the water came up, and we were thrown into sort of emergency operations by, you know, afternoon.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things too is how, unfortunately, your public works area was right in that floodplain, and I know that obviously complicates matters when you've got a flood and you need access to that equipment, and now all of a sudden that very equipment that you need, you did evacuate and get out of there, but the building itself and everything was right in that floodplain.
Yeah, so this is the next sort of slides here kind of show what we were starting to deal with. so we're looking at our wastewater treatment plant, which is a little north, but it's in that same sort of floodplain. And then there's also the picture of the water streaming into our wastewater treatment plant. And then down below, that's our water department and DPW facility. So, I mean, you can imagine, like, okay, if one of these systems sort of blows up, like, that's a really bad day. But we're dealing with, you know, a down treatment plant. Our water department facilities, you know, underwater. Our DPW facilities underwater. We also have our fuel fuel facility for all our equipment and vehicles for not just DPW, but public safety as well, fire department, police department in this floodplain. So, you know, it was, I guess the question is, like, you know, at that point, what do you do next? And because this is sort of what we're left with, a lot of debris, a lot of pumps needed, destroyed garage, and, you know, a lot of folks coming into town to try to help support, and, you know, you're left coordinating all that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part, a piece of this that we need to talk about, and that is, John, I know that you guys, one of the good parts of when you have something like this happen, people are very quick to respond. They want to help. They're anxious to, you know, assist the city. I know they were very anxious to help you guys out in Oneida. So you had state agencies coming in and other responders coming in to Oneida. But that also creates a complication. It's kind of an unintended consequence where you, as the city engineer, you kind of go from what do we need to take care of to now all of a sudden we can see in the lower right portion you've got media to deal with. You've got, because, you know, people want to get the story out and it's a big story, and also you've got all these agencies coming in saying, hey, you know, how can we help? We're here. But they, you know, they don't really know your city. They don't know everything about it. So I talk a little bit about that, what it was like to try to juggle those responsibilities, because you're trying to coordinate your staff to get all this cleanup done, then additional people come in from the outside, the news media, etc.
Sure. Yeah, so after that, you know, initial day of, okay, you know, emergency mode and reactive mode, the next day is, okay, how do you get back to somewhat normal operations and deal with this disaster? And so you're coordinating a lot of, you know, you have a lot of agencies coming in to help. You're going to have, you know, the state DOTs coming in. You're going to have your state Department of Environmental Conservation, state emergency management, and then you're also coordinating internally with your own departments. I'm just one wheel in the cog of, you know, trying to get back to some semblance of normal operations. We've got water department and police department and fire department. So trying to coordinate all those groups and understanding that, you know, you're getting all this help, but you're going to have to use it as effectively and efficiently as possible, because they're not going to be able to stay for any sort of long haul to try to help you through this. And one thing we kept saying to ourselves is, like, okay, this isn't going to be a sprint. This is going to be a marathon. You know, we're going to have to deal with this debris cleanup and, you know, all the dewatering, as you can kind of see in the picture here of the menagerie of pumps that we have set up. And, you know, this is our DPW facility on the bottom here with, you know, fuel and oil and hazardous waste issues and all our equipment destroyed. And, yeah, of course, dealing with the media and communicating with the residents. And so you're trying to juggle a lot of this, you know, management and coordination with all these folks.
Yeah, it's obviously it's a very gargantuan task, and you were no doubt scrambling around trying to take care of all of this as you not only have this emergency you've got going on, but then, you know, your normal operations don't cease just because you have an emergency. There's other things that need to be done too, and you've got an additional several months, I'm assuming, of cleanup time. What was the cost of that? I know that's something that people think about a lot, something like this. I know it was we talked about it was declared a disaster area, correct?
Yeah, so I should go back to that. So it was declared as a presidential disaster, and then behind that there's a lot of work too, as far as you have to come up with cost estimates to show that it meets whatever the county threshold is, and so you think, okay, let's just react to these issues and try to solve them, but you're really spending a lot of time in the background doing sort of the paperwork management side of it as well, trying to try to get these cost estimates together quickly and submit them to FEMA, and then you get into sort of this, okay, we can get reimbursed, but how do we track that for FEMA reimbursement, and what's the framework? And when after a few days of dealing with this disaster and kind of coming to grips of what the cost is going to be, you're going to have a lot of coordination with, say, your comptroller, and you're going to start trying to find how do you afford this, and how do you track it and management so that you can kind of optimize your reimbursement request to FEMA if it is a presidential disaster.
Sure.
And getting back to your original question, so yeah, the total damages we had for this event that were submitted to FEMA were around 1.3 million, which that was just for public assistance, which means it's just our city cost that we captured. So if that's not incorporating all the the residential damage that they incurred, that's just our
cost to your operation,
cost.
yeah.
Right.
So
which we don't budget for that, unfortunately. We don't have a $1.3 million buffer in there, but.
Well, it was a 100-year event, so a 100-year event you don't plan for, so that's understandable. So now I think this is a good point to transition to. You guys had been previously kind of toying with the idea or thinking about getting software to manage your daily operations. So kind of walk us through that. This obviously made it even more clear that you needed some type of help to do this. You kind of walk us through, how did you manage it while you were in the flood, and then that prompted, accelerated the conversation about we need to get some software to manage this. And I think what you've got in front of us here is a great illustration. Talk us through this slide and kind of tell us about this.
Yeah, so prior to the flood, I mean, we started looking at moving towards a GIS management system. I was relatively new to coming into this position. I started 2011, and then this event started this happened 2013. So, I was still, no pun, getting my feet wet with the operations here. That was terrible. So
but very true.
Yeah. So we,
welcome to Oneida.
Right. Yeah. So we during the flood event, as I was saying, we had a lot of help from state groups and other municipalities even that were willing to come in and try to help us out. And the issue we had during the flood was, okay, how do we coordinate all this? Because all we had at the time was, you're looking at a paper map of our sanitary sewer network, which, for example, just cleaning the sanitary sewers. Okay, so we've got a DOT in to help us out. We've got our guys internally helping us, and we're using highlighters and, just trying to coordinate the two. And obviously that's not the most efficient way to try to get this, even a simple task like that, done. So as we kind of started recovering from this flood event, we really started looking hard again at a GIS system, and it was expedited by what we saw during the flood event as, okay, this would have really helped us to kind of coordinate some of these operations. So what you can see on the right-hand side is our sanitary sewer network and cartograph system, which would have been extremely helpful during the flood event to kind of manage who is doing what, and I can talk a little bit about, how we would have used it, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, I
create.
think one of the good things to see, this is a really good comparison contrast slide right here. All of us have used those static maps to the left there, a paper map, and you're looking at, some information there, but I don't know exactly what I'm looking at. I don't live in Oneida. I've never been to Oneida, but I know exactly what I'm looking at on the right-hand side. I know that I'm looking at an aerial map of the city of Oneida with the sewer manholes and the sewer mains illustrated for me. And having never been to Oneida, I can walk in and see exactly where the mains and manholes are. On the map on the left, I'm going to have to really do some searching, and I don't have anything live and up to date to tell me who's done what and when. I think that's really important. I know one of the things you dealt with, John, is just the kind of the paper solution while you were going through the flood. And I know you've got a couple of slides on that to kind of show what you were using to try to manage this flood, and then we'll talk about kind of your day-to-day operations now, having gone through the flood and the lessons learned. So it was very much a paper-based system that you used during the flood.
Yeah, so as for the FEMA reimbursement, they're going to want to see, okay, what staff was doing what task at what time with what piece of equipment. And as I mentioned before, when during the actual recovery phase, usually whoever's managing these systems is going to be bouncing around doing a whole bunch of things, whether it's coordinating with other agencies or communicating with mayor and council or whatever. It's really hard to kind of keep track of this stuff when it's occurring. So the problem we had was, okay, things are starting to settle down, and now we've got to put this reimbursement package together for FEMA, and we're kind of looking back in time to try to figure out, okay, who is in what piece of equipment and what were they doing. And I mean, this is an example of a spreadsheet that we sent to FEMA for reimbursement, and I mean, it stretches out into, I think, September. Every single day we're trying to keep track of who's doing what, and we're using time cards and the typical like journals and what have you. Plus, I should probably mention too, our time clock got wiped out in the flood, so we did lose some of those the old paper tracking mechanisms. So, if we would have had cartographs, say, during the flood event, it would have been a much easier task because, we could have given, say, our field guys have iPads now to do this stuff. We could have had given it to one of the state agency field crews, give them a 15-minute tutorial and be like, and show them, hey, you're cleaning this sewer, here's the check boxes, click it when it's done, and our guys will see it automatically, and they're coordinating real time. Plus, they're tracking their time, so I'm not going to have to go back in time and try to figure out who was doing what, and it's going to make reporting so much easier.
Yeah, it really takes that part, and I know just administratively the burden of trying to gather all of that information and creating the spreadsheets, going off of time cards. I know you said you had journals where people would write, I was in this truck for this many hours, and kind of worrying about, is that data really accurate? Did we get, reimbursed for everything we actually spent? Things like that. And now you've got this up-to-date, up to the second reporting capability with software using iPads in the field, gaining that efficiency where everyone is seeing the same map and they're seeing it live so that tasks can appear and disappear as they're taken care of, and that data is collected in the background so you don't have to worry about following up with spreadsheets or time cards or notes in journals. So with that, you're obviously, you got through the flood. You decided, what was it that made you decide on Cartograph's OMS? What was it about choosing Cartograph that kind of made the difference for you?
Sure. Yeah, we tested out a few different software programs. So we we tested out sort of a large system that really wasn't designed for our size city. It was more, I'd say, like if you're a big construction firm, you had equipment all over. And we even tested out some stuff that I would say is just glorified spreadsheets. It didn't have any mapping systems to it. So to me, the cartograph system, it kind of fit that. It was like a Goldilocks type system for us because it met the needs that we had as far as asset tracking, and the other piece that we liked is that we could kind of grow with it too, adding assets. So that was one part. And then I think one of the real key pieces was, for my crew guys, it's really intuitive as far as, okay, I can give them, say, an iPad, and here's a quick, like I was saying, a quick 15-minute tutorial on how you track this stuff, or if you're doing work, and it's, they get it. So that was really a key component too, is just how accessible it is.
Yeah, the ease of use and the intuitive nature of the iPad is something that we've gotten a lot of compliments on. So that's good to know that you found it useful for that. And talking about your day-to-day operations, and let's talk now a little bit about what you currently use with OMS, the assets and work that you manage with it, and kind of what you're using now as far as assets and everything in OMS currently.
Sure. Yeah. So we use it for our sanitary sewer distribution network. We use it for tracking any. We're starting a video inspection program to do our entire network. Any repair work that we do on our system, any replacement work we do or rehab work. We use it for our roadways, so any repaving work or semi-permanent patches, we track that, and that it just gives us a much better tool to manage our road system. And we use state funding pretty much for our resurfacing program, so we have to be really efficient with our funding. Not that every municipality has to be very efficient, but this just gives us much more data to manage our road network and use the funds as efficiently as possible. And then we're using it for our traffic signs, which you got thousands of traffic signs all over the place. So this is a great tool to kind of just keep track of all those signs and make sure they're up to spec with MUTCD requirements and retroreflectivity. And so we're also using it for, we're going to start using it more for our city trees to really get a good inventory of what we have and help us manage our city trees. And then our storm system too, right along with our sanitary sewer network, same sort of management, any work that we do on them, any cleaning we do on the distribution network, we track it.
Yeah, so you've got not only what you're doing now, but you're now seeing that you've managed these assets. You've got a bigger vision for the future and future plans to use it even more.
Yeah, correct. So we're going to be looking at well, this year we're going to start using Cartograph to manage our ADA curb ramps. There's been, in New York at least, there's been some increased regulation on ADA accessibility, and making sure there's, the city has a plan to upgrade all the ramps. So we're going to use Cartograph to manage that. That's going to be extremely helpful. And then we're probably going to, once, we'll probably be looking to also use it for our city-owned parking lots as well, to just manage that better.
Yeah, pavement areas. Yeah, that's. I know. Also, you mentioned a flood mitigation program you're using it for as well. You're going to be using it, and currently taking care of that.
Yeah. So I guess one bright spot of this flood is it also opens up some mitigation funding. So we actually have a $22 million project that's going on right now, funded by FEMA and New York State, to buy out the applicants, housing applicants in that floodplain area. So we've got about 155 folks, residential and commercial, that are applicants to the program. So what we're doing is once we own those properties, the city will take over. City will take over the property and demo the property, and it'll be forever floodland. So again, it's going to be a reimbursement process. So this time we'll have Cartograph to kind of track that and report it much easier to FEMA than say trying to go back in history and figure out what we did or what we didn't do, who's in what. So you know,
Yeah.
better late than never, but yeah.
Right. Well, I think that gives us a good transition now to just kind of ask the question, you know, what would be different now? I mean, you've seen a little bit with this flood mitigation project, but it's not, you know, that's not an emergency per se. How would you kind of see this playing out differently now? Let's say you had the flood and you already had OMS in place. What big differences do you think, or big takeaways that you would pass along to others that, hey, you know, having OMS now, this is how it would look different. How would it look different now, John, if you'd have had OMS?
Yeah, so if we would have had the OMS system implemented pre-flood, so our guys, our field crews would have been able to utilize the iPads to track all these reimbursement expenses. So, you know, our guys are doing debris removal for months and months and months. Our field guys can just, I can empower you guys, keep track of it, you know what, and when it's time to send that FEMA reimbursement, it's, you know, quick review and preparing the report to FEMA with all that data versus trying to recreate it with journals and time cards and spreadsheets, and so it would be a huge management time relief if we were to have it implemented then. And you know, if we did have it, I would gather that, you know, we tried to capture everything that we could for reimbursement, but I'm sure looking back we may have missed some stuff. But so this would have given us probably a more accurate number, I would say, to what our reimbursement was, and kind of maximize maybe our reimbursement.
Yeah, I think that's one of the kind of common things when people think about purchasing operations management, like what we're talking about here today. And you know, a lot of times we talk about cost, but what we don't often think of, but as we think it through, and you've just said it, is you would have saved a lot of money and time and going back and trying to historically gather all these things, probably exponentially more than what you actually spent on the software you would have saved just by the efficiency of having all this information. So I think that's important. And I love the bottom of this slide here you have, and we no longer use handwritten journals and spreadsheets. I think that's a great line to have, and important as far as your efficiency is concerned. So kind of as we wrap up here a little bit, John, what suggestions, you know, we looked at the poll when people took the poll at the very beginning of this webinar, and you know, with the flood plan, those disaster plans, and it was about 38%, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, have a plan in place and gone through it. What would you suggest as far as having people prepare for a disaster, having gone through what you guys went through? You know, you hadn't been at the city very long, and you had to face this catastrophic, all of a sudden, 8 a.m. it starts, and by noon you've got a full-blown disaster on your hands. You've got media coming in, you've got all these, you know, your public works building is flooded, your water department, everything is kind of falling apart, if you will, one thing after another. What would you say to people, you know, before the disaster, right now at this webinar, when everything's normal and fine and you're just kind of going through your everyday stuff? What suggestions would you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of takeaways, looking back on it now. So I guess one, if you are leaning towards implementing a GIS program, the sooner the better, and figure out how to use it and figure out how you'd use it during an emergency event. So, and that kind of ties into if, doing a tabletop exercise with your counterparts at, say, like county emergency management or internally with your other departments with public safety, that'd be probably a key point. Nobody has time for it. It's always, I'm sure most people, yeah, that's a great idea, but everyone's busy. But it will save you tons of time down the road if you have that sort of desktop exercise of what each group would do during a flood event, and kind of memorialize it in some sort of living report that you could modify, as an emergency management plan or disaster plan. That'd be a big one. I'd also say that if making sure your inventory is up to speed as far as like what equipment you have, and do an annual sort of inventory on all the stuff that your department has, because when you're doing those reimbursements, that's really helpful, especially if you know what the cost was when you bought it. So that's key. So those are two key points I can think of.
Sure.
Yeah, I think those are the big ones.
Yeah, I think it is important to know what you have, where it's at. I think those are all very important. Then most importantly, going through that exercise and knowing if a disaster happens, here's how we're going to prepare for it. Here's who's going to be in different places. This is the equipment we're going to have. This is, we're going to have our iPads out there. We're going to have our system live and up to date. I think that's really critical. So as we kind of close out today, I want to give you a few minutes to ask any questions you might have. And as Damien mentioned, you can use the chat feature to do that Q&A. And so if you have a question, please feel free right now to type that out. And while you're doing that, I just want to take some time to once again thank John Rauscher and the City of Oneida for being so generous with your time and really giving us a really clear picture of what happened in Oneida. And I think most importantly, some really good tips for managing your operation, your day-to-day operation, and then preparing for those events that none of us obviously want to see. I mean, you hate it when a community goes through a difficulty, and we see it, on the news. We see fires and floods and tornadoes and hurricanes, and a lot of different things can happen in an organization, and all of them, a lot of times lead to things like what you were talking about, where you wake up one day and it's cloudy, and the next day you've got an airboat running through your town. So those things do happen. As they do, though, it's important to be prepared for them and to have a system in place where you don't have to, like John said, you don't have to have maps that are paper-based and writing on them with highlighters and trying to refer back to old time cards and journals. You can just have a very simple, easy-to-use, up-to-the-second system that says, here's what's going on, here's where it's going on, here's what's happening. I think one of the other things that's important, too, is as that's happening, officials can see that work is getting done. They can see the areas that it's getting done, and that gives them peace of mind to know that the work is getting done. It doesn't happen instantaneously, like you said, John, earlier in the webinar. It's it doesn't happen overnight. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and you guys cleaned up tons and tons of debris. So and I think you said, if I remember correctly, it was several months in the making that you had to clean that up, obviously. So those kind of things do happen, unfortunately, but if you can be prepared and have a good system in place, Cartograph OMS can certainly help you with that. So with that, again, thanks, John. We appreciate it, and we'll take those questions. I don't know, Damien, do you have some questions for us?
Yeah, we have quite a few, actually. John, we're being flooded.
Okay.
We're being flooded with questions here.
Here we go.
Trying to work that in there.
Thank you, Damien.
First question: is there a report that Cartograph provides for FEMA reimbursement?
Well, I don't know, John, if you want to talk about that at all from your perspective, but we certainly do. We have you can use a checkbox within our system. Any task or work order that is FEMA related, you can simply check that box. It comes out of the box that way. And if you do have a FEMA event, you certainly can classify it as such and use that to roll up into your report to get a total cost of that. I don't know, John, if you want to talk about anything you guys might have in place.
Yeah, at least on our side, like as far as the backup information, they were the state and FEMA is pretty flexible on what our backup looked like. But then they had a, which would be a a cartograph style report, but then they have a kind of rigid form that needs to be filled out per FEMA requirements that pulls from that data.
Okay, and who is able to access your maps, John? The city only, or are there other people?
So actually, that's a good point. So on the OMS system, we the detail work orders and requests, that's all just city employees. But we also are using the resident request feature. So that was actually, we didn't buy the software for this resident request feature, but it's been extremely helpful for us because with this feature, basically a resident has an app on their phone. They can take a photo of, say, a pothole and shoot it to us at the city, and everyone sees it automatically, and we can get out there and take care of it. But yeah, as far as the internal mapping, we can only see it. But say we had an agency coming to town during the flood, I could give that guy an iPad that has that map on it, and they could use it to do like sewer cleaning, that kind of thing.
Okay, and then this will answer a couple questions here. What are you using to collect the coordinates for mapping? And then also, how did you build up your system inventory? How did you collect those assets?
Sorry, what was the first one?
What are you using to collect the coordinates for mapping?
Oh, to get off the ground running, we had some GIS data for our sanitary sewer network, so we were able to Cartograph actually input all that into their system for us, and so we were able to get off the ground day one with our sanitary sewer network. And our storm sewer network, we don't have any sort of CAD data or GIS data, so we're basically using the iPads to, we'll get on iPad and add that asset. Same with trees. We're just using the iPads, or now there's the app with the phone that we can use. So no special like GIS units or anything like that.
Okay, and to answer Barb's question, yes, the recording will be available at the conclusion of this webinar. John, will you be able to correlate or track a specific piece of equipment with a specific employee during the event?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I guess I can elaborate on it. Yeah, because with the, if we set up a task, we have all our staff input into Cartograph, so it's as easy as just clicking on, okay, Bob is running this piece of equipment, so it's pretty easy to track that.
Okay, and then how long did it take you to get Cartograph up and running?
Yeah, so like I said, with the sanitary sewer network, we were up and running day one because we had all that data already input. So, maybe it was a half a day to add all my guys, all the staff guys in, and then all the equipment so that we could track, who's using what piece of equipment on which asset, say sanitary sewer pipe. And I mean, we're still, we're still refining like our tree inventories and our storm sewer network. So we're still adding assets to that, but and our traffic, actually our traffic signs were already in GIS format. So sanitary sewer and traffic, we were going day one.
Okay, and then how did you get other members of your organization to adopt the software?
Well, I think part of that is, like I was saying, when we were evaluating which software to kind of move forward with, the fact that the cartograph system is pretty intuitive. That was, you know, because typically your DPW guys they're not sitting in front of a computer all day, and it, you know, they're not the most computer savvy folks, but they're, you know, the best guys when it comes to running equipment. So we needed something that was going to be really intuitive for them. So that was, you know, I think the sell to them was, hey, look, you know, you guys are doing all this really great work with maintaining this infrastructure and this network. Let's show it off and show how much work we're doing. And it helps me immensely when, you know, I'm going into our budget every year and I can point and say, hey, look, this is how much sanitary sewer we clean this year. You know, and this is how much we're targeting for next year, and this is how much pipe we need to replace, and that's why we need this much money to, you know, for our pipe materials fund. So I think it just gives them a benchmark. So it made it pretty, I don't know, it was pretty easy to get those guys on board.
Okay. Well, it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. I want to thank the two of you for this presentation. It was great. Lots of great material. John, I'm happy to see that you didn't walk away from your position with Oneida right when the flood was happening, because I probably would have thought about it myself. So
yeah.
this webinar together.